Wits School of Governance. It's wonderful to be part of this larger festival that I'll tell you about in a minute. So what we're going to be doing today is a really interesting and punchy discussion by friends and colleagues of the Wits School of Governance. And we really want to be part of this festival from the academic side. So we want to be who we are. So we want to have a critical engagement, and that's what the session is. My name is Caryn Abrahams. I'm a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance, and I'm going to host the session today. It's part of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, the South African hub of it. And really what the festival is about is a gathering internationally of bureaucrats who want to do things a little differently. So they want to have state people who work in the civil service engage on how to be innovative without the kinds of red tape bureaucracy. They want to think about how we can provide support, think about good government, thinking about it beyond bureaucracy, even though bureaucracy is part of the architecture that we have. And so part of the manifesto of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival is that we're committed to a strong public sector and we want to unleash the hidden and untapped potential within public administrations. And this platform is offering an opportunity for the multitude of unsung heroes across the globe to put new ideas into the spotlight. And really what our engagement is today is thinking about those creative engagements between the state and academia, and thinking about ways that we are able to have positive, constructive discussions about it. It's important that we hear these stories to recognize the efforts towards progressive change. Yes, to celebrate them, but also to allow ourselves to have a different kind of narrative. We're quite used to the heavy critiques that are often brought within academia. In fact, that's what we encourage our students to do. And critique has a place, positive critique has a place. And here we want to reflect on stories of collaboration, on creativity, on solidarity. Some of those are initiated by communities, some by local government, and others with formalized partnership between government and academia. We ask whether these stories of meaningful change and innovative ways of thinking about what we do, we ask about whether it can help us reevaluate ourselves, help us reevaluate the systems that we have, the initiatives that we have, and it helps us foreground our successes. So this session is really aimed at committed and forward-thinking public servants, whether you're joining us live or in a recording later on, who understand bureaucratic systems, but who also understand the needs to navigate these systems in a different kind of way to figure out what's possible and how our successes should be measured. And so to join us having this creative conversation are three wonderful speakers. I'm very excited to welcome them on the Wits School of Governance's behalf. A warm welcome to Rashid, Seedat, to Kayla Brown and Dr. Candice Morkel. I think in some ways, all of you have been connected to the Wits School of Governance. I'll tell you a little bit about that just now. But all of these speakers will offer some really interesting ideas from their particular work-life experience. And really this is meant to be a conversation about what's possible, a conversation about the kind of creative ways that the state and academia can engage in a collaborative way to bring about a progressive change. And so let's get straight in to the presentations today. Our first speaker is Rashid Seedat. He is the new Executive Director of the Gauteng City Region Observatory. The GCRO, the Gauteng City Region Observatory, is a partnership of Gauteng Provincial Government, South African Local Government, Wits University, and UJ. And it's aimed at conducting independent research on all social, economic, environmental, governance dimensions of the city region. Before joining the GCRO, Rashid headed up the Gauteng Planning Commission division in the Office of the Premier in Gauteng, where he was in Gauteng province, where he was responsible for transversal, strategic, spatial, and infrastructure planning and performance monitoring and evaluation. He also headed the delivery support unit that sought to accelerate service delivery priorities across Gauteng provincial departments. Before that, he was at the city of Joburg, heading up the Central Strategy Unit. And he also is a trustee and board member of the Kathrada Foundation, of the Irma Kathrada Foundation. Rashid is a Witsie, where he received his undergrad degree and also his master's from what used to be known as the Public and Development Management School, and now is the Wits School of Governance. So he's an alumnus of the school. Welcome to you, Rash. Over to you for your presentation. I'll introduce the speakers just before they speak. Welcome.
Thanks, Caryn. Let me share my screen and go to my presentation. Wait, hang on. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Let me just say a couple of things. Firstly, thanks for that introduction, Caryn. You know, you said that that the participants are your students, but I see some heavy hitters like Gechi and Rihanna, presumably Rihanna Musaji and so on. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. I know that some of you may have seen a bit of this presentation. I'm going to actually fly through it. It's really more sort of indicative for what I'm going to say, you know, without a presentation, in relation to the issues around collaboration and constructive engagement, etc. So I think that, well, you did hear that the GCRO is a very interesting collaboration between the Gauteng Provincial Government, Wits University, UJ, and organized local government in Gauteng in the form of SALGA. And I think many of you do know that we run a quality of life survey that started almost at the inception of, or soon after the inception of the GCRO, about 13 years ago. So this is the 6th iteration of it. And I'm really going to fly through it because the point is not really to have a discussion about the substance of it, but just to give a sense of what is coming through. So the quality of life survey is one of the largest, randomly sampled. Data is representative at the ward level, and the data can be mapped in a variety of ways. There are 214 questions. You can see the variety of topics that are covered in the questionnaire, and the size of the blocks basically give you a sense about the weighting or the amount of questions that each of those, you know, how it's sort of composed of. This is where the respondents actually live, and if you have a sense about the concentration, population concentrations in Gauteng, it basically mirrors that. And I think very importantly, it covers all 429 wards, which basically make up the Gauteng province. This is when data collection happened. You can see most of it in November last year, and then kind of a slowdown because of the holidays, and then the pickup during the peak. So this is soon after, about 2 months or 2 or 3 months after the first peak, and then during the second peak of COVID, there was, fieldwork was being done there as well. Now, I'm just going to sort of jump into some of the things that have come through. So what you'll see, and I really don't have time to go through all of these things, but in general, you'll see a very critical kind of perspective of government. This one maybe not so much, because what this basically says is that the household support of the sort of the number of people who apply for the COVID grant, or percentage of households who that applied for the COVID grant was something in the order of 35%, and of that 60%, 67% actually received it. And if you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side, what you'll see is something like 62% of satisfaction in aggregate of people in terms of their satisfaction with regard to the government's response to COVID. I'm going to skip some of these slides, but what you'll see here is like a major decline in relation to basically refuse removal collected weekly. So for example, and Mfuleni probably exemplifies this more than anything else. In the previous survey, which is the blue bar, it was in the order of 59%. And if you look at the satisfaction, it's dropped to 26% in that particular case. And this is the case with many other things, and you can see, for example, dissatisfaction with electricity interruptions between the previous survey and the current survey by municipality in Gauteng. I'm going to skip some of these. Let me just see. And I mean, this is basically has to do with low levels of trust in government and low confidence in the future. Again, if you track this over time, you will see that it actually has worsened quite significantly. Again, issues around corruption, particularly, I mean, the last two kinds of corruptions, like driver's license corruption and traffic officers and so on, that kind of corruption is found to be very, very unacceptable. Well, interestingly enough, the first one, which is kind of nepotism, is somewhat more acceptable. But and I mean, it'll be to probe that particular thing will be, I guess, somewhat interesting. Again, I think more issues around corruption. And this is satisfaction with national government. So if you look at how we traced it over time, from 2011 to over the last 10 years, you can see the blue components have actually dropped off quite a lot. So there's just something like 27 plus 6% of satisfaction. The rest of 52% are either dissatisfied or very, very dissatisfied. And you can see how that has worsened over time. What's happened with what's happened with provincial government is that it's actually it's dropped off quite a lot. I mean, say compared to the last survey, which was in the order of 44%. Now it's only in the order of 29% of satisfaction. And you can see how the dissatisfied components have increased very, very significantly over that period. And this is local government, which has historically been low in terms of satisfaction. But it's now sitting at only 26% in comparison to the last survey, which is in the order of 37%. So you can see again, quite a big drop in terms of that level of satisfaction. Yeah, and this is by municipality. I mean, in that sense, the best performing municipality is Midvaal. The metros, as you can see, have actually all dropped. I mean, in Ekurhuleni, it was 43%, Joburg 38%, and Tshwane 34%. In the last survey, they're all now in the late 20s or in the mid 20s, as you can see. Mfuleni, of course, is a kind of a basket case, for the want of a better term. I mean, the total satisfaction there is only 9%, which is, I think, probably unprecedented in the history of this survey. This is a spatial representation of the same data. So if you look at the last survey in 2017-18, obviously dissatisfaction represented by the dark colors. And if you do that, you can see how it looks like in the present circumstances. So significantly worse. And you can see again, Mfuleni represented in the sort of dark maroon color at the bottom. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, and basically just, I think, talk to the sort of pertinent issues in relation to this particular engagement. So, I mean, in the sort of pre-discussion that I had with some of the panelists early on, just before we formally started the session, I mean, the issue is that how does government respond to this negative story and picture of them? I think that there has been a reasonable amount of maturity in relation to this. I think that this whole notion of evidence-based policy making, planning, and decision making has begun to seep in at a number of levels. So, you know, in the past, what would normally happen is that they say, oh, so what was your methodology? And, you know, why is your sample so small, and so on. So they basically attack the integrity of the survey by attacking the methodology. I think that because the quality of life survey is a partnership between government and the universities, I think there's a sense in government that actually there's you know, there's a lot of rigor in terms of methodology to make sure that the results are actually reflective of what people are saying, you know, on the ground. And I think that, just to say, I mean, I've been, even though I just started at the GCRO as the ED, I've been a board member prior to that on behalf of provincial government for 10 years. So I have a reasonably good sense of how government has worked with the GCRO, and I think because in a way it was partially a creature of government. The former Premier Mbazima Shilowa, along with the then Vice Chancellors of Wits and UJ, came together and said, well, why don't we set up something like this idea of an urban observatory, which was put forward by UN Habitat, you know, some years ago, I think became, you know, something of a currency. And also the idea of city regions, as opposed to kind of province in a constitutional sense, to bring some of these ideas together to establish the Gauteng City Region Observatory. And I think that the GCRO, with, I mean, someone like Caryn herself was a staff member at the GCRO. I think that the idea was, how do you get people who are kind of well, not bureaucrats, and I think who would actually do research. And I mean, the one thing I've said is that the amount of investment, say, provincial government puts in, like in the current year, and we're completely transparent about this, provincial government pays over subsidy of in the order of 25 million to the GCRO to run its affairs. Wits comes to the party, as it were, with infrastructure and kind of HR, financial services. UJ comes with postdocs and other contributions. So all parties contribute, but the lion's share of the contribution comes from provincial government in cash terms. And it's never been an issue, because I think, I know, because having sat on the other side, that the sense that what's coming out of the GCRO is like thoroughly researched, is rigorous, and it's not just their sort of critique for its own sake. And I think that's maybe an important point to make. I mean, I think there's a sense about how do you use the critical perspectives coming through from the GCRO to actually improve the overall performance of government. So there's a real utility there. It's not just sort of research for its own sake. I'm not shooting down sort of, you know, research for its own sake, but I'm just saying, for this kind of arrangement and partnership to work, I think that's the overall approach. Just to say that I mean, in the past, when this idea has been taken to international conferences and so on, that people get blown away, because in many ways, the kind of model is absolutely unique. Many people have, so you go and they speak about double helix and triple helix arrangements between universities and the private sector and government and so on. But in relation to a sort of research observatory idea, I think this is unique in the world, or so I believe. Let me leave it at that, Caryn, and I think that we can pick up some of the issues in the discussion going forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rash. You know, I had the Joni Mitchell song in my head when you were speaking. I see the world from both sides now. And so we'll pick up on some of those thoughts later on. We'll have some probes for you, and just to interrogate some of the stuff that you said. So our second speaker today, thank you so much, is Kayla Hanna Brown, who is the project manager at the South African Cities Network. Kayla is leading the Inclusive Cities program, where she conducts research into the issues and into dynamics affecting municipalities and municipalities' goals of achieving spatial transformation. Kayla is an architect and urban designer by training, with experience in architectural design, lecturing, community participation, stakeholder management, research, and urban design. And Kayla is here to tell us about a really exciting initiative of the South African Cities Network called the Good Hood Stories. She'll tell you more about it. But they, you know, please, as the speakers are speaking, Google their institutions, get in touch with what's out there. Part of this, for those who are joining us in the Zoom call, and those who are joining us live on Facebook, you know, we'd like this to be the start of just kind of a blooming of creative potential within civil servants and like-minded individuals, especially researchers. Kayla, over to you, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Caryn. Thank you for inviting the Cities Network to be a part of this, and I'm very honored to be among such esteemed panelists. I'm just going to share my screen. I have a very short presentation that I've put together for today. And in this presentation, I really want to show two sides of the coin that we're seeing in our work with practitioners in local government. The first is kind of the heavy research stuff, the diagnostics, the what's not working. And then the second story is cases that actually are working, and these kinds of rays of light that we're seeing, albeit anecdotally perhaps, but nonetheless, there are these incredible stories that are happening, and I'm going to share some of those with you. But firstly, just to give a sense of some of the research that we've done that helps to demonstrate the context within which local government practitioners are working. And the very constrained institutional infrastructure that, in a sense, inhibits creativity and innovation. And this research was called The Rules of the Game, and it actually focused on the performance management system in municipalities, and was based on this idea that practitioners were feeding back to us saying, we are measuring the wrong things. We are not measuring the things that enable meaningful community participation, that enable innovation and creativity. So this study took a deep dive into the performance management system by looking at 5 cities, conducting a series of long interviews with practitioners from those cities, primarily focusing on the built environment, but also looking at supply chain management, audit, and HR. And we really wanted to understand what what actually gets done and what shapes what gets done in a municipality. And this was based on this idea that there are both written and unwritten rules in any organization. And particularly in our South African municipalities, we see the written rules very, strict legislation, plans, frameworks, some of the kind of the MFMA, those kinds of almost tyrannical legislations, as we've come to see, that determine a huge amount of the culture that gets established in a municipality. There's also the unwritten rules, political pressures, the relationships, the hierarchies, financial pressures, and all of this comes together to create this institutional culture. And we were really trying to understand the fact that there's this contradiction where on paper, it seems like everyone is achieving and there's generally very good performance. People are getting their bonuses, targets are getting ticked, and everything seems to be ticking over as it should. But then we look at what we see in reality, and this is where, like the quality of life survey can really help to give evidence to what we're seeing around us and demonstrates this mismatch that actually, things aren't working as it should. So then what does it mean for our performance management system? Are we measuring the right things that actually improve the quality of life for residents? So we really took this very close look at what a performance management system should be and how ours is working in our municipalities. And what we see is that we spend a huge amount of time, way too much time, on collecting performance information, meticulously spending hours and hours of entire teams collecting information, storing that information. But then what happens to it? And what we find in our report, that this is kind of where the management cycle stops. It stops around goal setting and the process of collecting performance information. But after that, we really don't see much. And that is the second side of performance management, which is taking that information, analyzing it, learning from it, and then using it to improve future practice. And this, we argue, is really where the opportunity for innovation lies. So if we're not focusing on this side of the performance management cycle and we're only focusing on the measurement, in our opinion, there isn't much point to this whole thing, because we're all running around in circles, spending all our time collecting this performance information, only for it to sit on someone's shelf gathering dust. The opportunity really has to be in this side, the learning and the improving for future planning. And so how does this all link to innovation and partnering with the community, which is what we're talking about today? And what we really see is that when working in the system of kind of rigorous punishment and reward, a system that is mostly punitive rather than developmental, there's a pervasive culture of fear that's created where playing it safe is the default state of play. And we don't believe that this is the kind of environment that fosters innovation, creativity, or collaboration. So, when, for example, when you talk about community partnering, what does that look like in reality compared to how it's measured on a scorecard, where often all you have to do is tick the box that you attended the meeting, and as evidence you show your attendance register. But what does that say about the quality of engagement in that meeting? So these are all the questions that emerge, and ultimately I think what we really want to argue in order to foster innovation is that we need more of a culture where it's okay to fail, and allowing failure and understanding failure as part of the learning process. And we know that experimentation and innovation are critical for finding some of the solutions to the very complex problems that we face. But our organizations don't accept failure. So we don't create that environment for innovation and creativity. And the performance management system needs to be able to accept failure and to learn from it and to grow forward. So this is kind of the one side of the story. Based on research we've done, it's heavy. It's not a pretty story. But now I want to move very quickly into something a little bit more uplifting. And this is this other project that we've been doing at the South African Cities Network, which is called the Good Hood Stories. And it was about collecting, identifying, celebrating stories, and sometimes very small localized stories of good practice. And we define good practice as innovative, creative, and collaborative. So it's quite a broad definition. And we asked residents of cities to submit their stories of what was making them proud of their cities. And through that overall collection, we then started filtering through all of these stories that were submitted. And we ended up choosing 4 that we thought provided very instructive lessons for practitioners about what it means to work innovatively and what it means to partner. So these are the 4 stories. You can see them on the screen, and we've created a 10-minute video about each of them. I've just come from a session now where we played the Helenvale SPUU video, but there's a video about all of them. We've also created a newspaper where you can read about the project champions behind the work and read about Q&As with them. But I want to focus now, just in the few minutes I have left, on 2 of these projects. So the first is the Helenvale SPUU. This is a really fascinating project. It's run by the Mandela Bay Development Agency, not the municipality, but they obviously work very closely with the municipality. And it really shows a blueprint for what it means to partner meaningfully with a community, and particularly quite a neglected community that had a deep mistrust of government. And I really encourage you to watch the video, and I think it has very important lessons for what it means and the legwork that it takes every day, nurturing, fostering those very human relationships, and not really focusing on the government versus the community, but understanding government officials themselves as community activists and embedded within the community. And this was a 9-year-long project. It was funded by the German Development Bank. And in that framework, they allowed for a lot of experimentation, a lot of changing tracks. So what started more as a built environment construction project ended up being actually more about the psychosocial aspects. And the focus was on counseling centers, assisting matriculants with employment. And the outcomes of this project have really been incredible, but it wasn't what they set out to do. So I think it says a lot about this ability to be able to change track once you start a project, and to use everything that you're learning about the space within you which you're working, and allowing yourself to then respond to that. And even though it might not be on your scorecard, or it might not be your target for the 9 years, to understand that, to go with the planned route is not going to work. And this needs to be rethought. So I think there are just so many lessons in this story, and I really encourage you to watch the video and read the newspaper, and I'll be posting the links to that in the chat. And then I'll just end very quickly with, I think I still have 1 minute, with another one of the Good Hood case studies, which is the Belhaven Memorial Center's Harm Reduction Center. And this was an initiative to deal with homelessness and a dependency on substance usage. And it was a very innovative response. And there's medication and there are different ways that this project was innovative, but I think the lesson that I want to share in particular is the way that the eThekwini municipality was able to get involved in this project, but not as a leader, rather as an enabler. So they identified that there were other people, there were NGOs, there was the private sector, there were the experts who were the ones who should be leading this work. And the municipality came in with the help of the mayor and the deputy mayor to say, how can we make this easier for you? What do you need us to do? Do you need space? Do you need a building? Do you need services? And let us give that to you so that you can continue to do this work, understanding that they could never be the drivers of this kind of project. And I think, that is an innovative way of working, and it's an innovative way of saying, we can't do it all. We know government can't, shouldn't, is not capable of doing it all. So then we need to look at cases of where others are leading the initiative and find out, how do we replicate those models? Because I think there are a huge amount of solutions for working like this and replicating this in other cities. So I'm going to end there and just trying to understand how these two stories fit together and how these stories of innovation fit into this larger structure of kind of rigorous rules and measuring of performance, to really just understand how do we begin to change the institutional architecture, not to make it more lenient, but to allow these kinds of stories of excellence to happen more, because we know these stories often happen in spite of government and not because of government. So I want to end it on that note, and I think this will transition nicely into what Dr. Morkel will speak about in her session.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Kayla, for those inspiring stories, and also just sharing that research with us. Really, really useful, I think, also for the School of Governance, just to have as part of our arsenal when we're teaching. It's interesting, in preparation of the session and this engagement with SACN, the School of Governance did a call. We put out a call about 3 weeks ago to a month ago to ask for these kinds of these stories of innovation, these examples of where what is possible comes into fruition, and we didn't get a single response. And part of that is, as you say, this kind of culture of looking for stories of failure. It's those are the stories we tell because those are the stories we look for, and our systems are built in a sense to capture those things in our search for accountability and good governance. So thanks for that. I think there's some interesting questions and conversations that we'll have at the session after Dr. Morkel presents. Thanks, Kayla. So colleagues, our final speaker is Dr. Sorry, before I introduce our next speaker, let me just remind you that there's a Q&A chat. There are a couple of questions that are coming into the chat. There may be some questions on Facebook. Please do send your questions, your comments. We'd love you to, in that way, be part of the conversation, and in the Q&A later, if there's opportunity to hear your voice. So our final speaker today is Dr. Candice Morkel. She's the director of CLEAR, which is a center for learning and evaluation studies in Africa. She's also senior lecturer in monitoring and evaluation at Wits. She has 20 years experience in government, academia, and the nonprofit sector, specializing in public sector governance and monitoring and evaluation. She currently oversees projects to support countries in their efforts to build national M&E systems, working in partnerships with government, civil society, and development partners. She has a range of experience in terms of evaluation capacity in building those in different countries across the continent, and has published widely on evaluation systems and capacity development. She's part of associations, professional associations for evaluation, both in South Africa and across the continent. And she is part of the International Evaluation Academy Council, where she serves on the Evaluation Education Working Group. So Dr. Morkel, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Caryn, and good morning to my panelists and good morning to the participants. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts with you this morning. Just give me a moment to share my screen because I also have a few slides to share with you. And just to say that the panelists have really set me up really nicely, because I think that a lot of what you've spoken about this morning is just going to be reinforced by what I have to say. And I think that one of the key principles or elements that's coming out really strongly for me is the element of partnership and collaboration. And that's quite a bit, that's how our approach is in the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results. So I'll talk a bit about that. But I thought, let me start us off by giving you a quotation from some research I did on the relationship between the state and civil society in building a capable developmental state. And this is from a social justice activist who was talking a bit about monitoring and evaluation. And they were saying, and I think indicators have done enormous damage. I mean, I saw that when I was doing interviews with prosecutors where they sift out rape cases in order to meet their targets. And this really goes to show, firstly, accounting has been given far too much control of the state. Now, that's a very jarring and very disappointing, thing to hear somebody talking about what their experience has been of monitoring. And there are many cases and interviews that I had that had similar kinds of perspectives around, measurement in the state. And I think this points to one of the great concerns that we who work in monitoring and evaluation and closely with government in monitoring and evaluation, this is one of the big concerns that we have, that there are perverse incentives that have come through and have been created by the way that monitoring and evaluation has been introduced into the state. And it really is a culture of compliance, a culture of auditing and target chasing that has really blurred, the real value that monitoring and evaluation can bring. So before I take you to some of the, better stories and how monitoring and evaluation can be helpful, let me talk a little bit about the problem statement and what some of the challenges are. Now, much of this is not going to be new to you if you've got any involvement or interest in what the state is doing, but allow me just to reinforce it, remind us of what we're talking about. And some of the stuff, Kayla, you spoke about already. So the focus on monitoring and reporting with a very strong compliance and accountability lens. There's also this multiplicity of unidirectional reporting regulations and requirements. So it's reporting just going one way, and people spending inordinate amounts of time, complying with reporting requirements, with templates, with formats, and new ones keep getting generated. And I think this has become really burdensome in the state. And there isn't that feedback loop and that learning that I think Kayla's slide so nicely kind of, highlighted for us. And then also with this language that we use in monitoring and evaluation, there's a very linear logic of development. So it presents this false promise of certitude. So there's like a linear pathway to, development impact, and a predictable pathway, and can be modeled and worked elsewhere. And so this linear rationality has kind of gotten us thinking that if we just check all of those boxes, and then things will be okay. But of course, development doesn't work that way. And that is part of what creates these perverse incentives and this upward accountability and this focus on performance. And so what has happened, and what I've seen happen in our work, is that the qualitative accounts of progress are not seen as being as impactful as reporting on your before, after numbers and percentages and tangible outputs. So, number of houses built and, number of centers that have been established. So another quote from the study that I did, an NPO said what they experienced. We want to see the numbers. I don't care about focused peer education or behavior change programs. I want to see the numbers, a political leader told me. So this person from an NPO was saying that they were told unequivocally that it's not about how well the program is progressing or what it's doing to change behaviors. And this was around a substance abuse program. They were told by a political leader, we want to see the numbers in the report. So there's a real punitive aspect around it as well to monitoring and reporting. And we can talk about, for example, the legislation that has perhaps lent itself to this. So if for example, in South Africa, the Public Audit Act, there was the non-financial performance reporting. That was something that became part of, it's not part of the audit opinion, but it is part of the management letter. And, departments really care about what is said about their non-financial performance reporting there. So they really try to make sure that they have portfolios of evidence that can demonstrate that they've done what they needed to do with the money that they've been given. So that's become, really punitive. And instead of about, focusing on the learning and accountability and transparency, it's been now about proving that you've got a portfolio of evidence to the AG that, you've been able to do what your annual performance plan said it was that you were going to do. Now the question is, how can we then utilize results-based management and M&E in a more meaningful way? So knowing what we know about the historical roots of results-based management and M&E in new public management. And if you know a little bit of the history about this, a lot of the M&E language and the guides and the formats and the approaches we use were actually located in, post-independence African states when they received aid and the structural adjustment programs that accompanied those. A lot of the ways in which the international finance institutions require that reporting, that accountability was around this results-based management. So these log frames and the logic modeling and all of that kind of language, a very strong historical root there. And so some of that really does lend itself, and we're suffering from a hangover that in the state currently. But there are elements of it that are helpful. So the question is, do we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater? We know historically it's problematic. We know some of these things are that's why it's such a compliance and audit and accountability oriented kind of punitive perspective around these things. But can we change it? Can we shift gears? Can we use what is useful from this? Can we use it to improve our planning? Can we use it for learning? Can we use it for course correction? And another thing that is quite close to my heart, because I've been working in M&E for a long time, and I've certainly made these mistakes in my years in government as well. But I've learned my lesson, is that we have this vocabulary that's very alienating, so M&E people can come with this, you need a theory of change, you need a results framework, you need outcomes indicators, without actually properly working together with program managers or working together with public officials. So how is this going to be meaningful to you? So never mind the language, but what is the impetus behind it? What is it trying to do? And then bring the language and putting vocabulary to it. So we kind of impose all of this language and this vocabulary on program managers and people who are, scrambling around trying to kind of decipher how to do a technical indicator descriptor and put the right wording together so they can report against that. So that's also another problem that actually the M&E sector needs to itself address, how it has, reproduced some of the problems and the challenges with M&E. So I want to talk to you about our organization our work in strengthening national and subnational evaluation systems. And the work that we're doing with governments to try to, change the perspective and change it around from compliance oriented to learning and course correction and evidence-informed decision-making. So central to our approach is a country-led approach, and our key partner in all of the countries that we work is actually national government. So we do try to make sure that we form relationships through various means with national governments, because we've learned through research and through practice. If you've got that, institutional direction and you've got the key leadership behind this evidence-informed decision-making, then a lot of the other work of institutionalizing some of these other pieces, they fall into place. But it really has to be country-led. And that's where we have had less momentum. It was in cases where governments were not ready yet. They weren't in a state of readiness to kind of adopt this. So you cannot impose this onto governments. And then secondly is to develop an understanding, a really deep understanding of, how do we link civil society and other parts and other non-state actors in driving this accountability. So we have something called a MISA, Monitoring and Evaluation Assessment Situation Analysis, and we do this in collaboration with government partners and with civil society and other non-state actors. So we convene partners together. We have a template of a questionnaire with certain questions, but that is also, customized and co-created together with government and their partners, where we say, okay, are these questions relevant for you? How should we change some of these questions? And then when we collect the information, we actually involve government officials and civil society to help us collect the information and actually help co-write the situation analysis, that this ownership right from the beginning. We're not diagnosing what is wrong in your system, but we together trying to establish and find out where some of the challenges lie and what are the parts we need to focus on strengthening and building first. And then another key point is to work with partners. So a lot of development partners often have similar missions. So UN agencies, for example, and other local partners have the same vision and mission to strengthen evidence-based decision-making and strengthen learning in the state for course correction. So we convene and we work together with these partners. We don't compete in that space. And we do give over to other partners if we see that they are leading in this space. It's like, oh, well, we will support what you're doing to build resilience and more sustainability, as the systems are being put in place. And so, of course, these technical and advisory services to help the countries then develop their strategies for strengthening these systems. So if they need a policy or if they need some research to be done, we will then also, walk alongside them, provide some of the services, but again, in a way that we co-produce it together with them. We don't do it as a service provider. We say, how do we do this together with yourselves? There is ownership from the get-go. And then one thing that I think that works very well as well is, and I know I've got kind of like less than a minute left, is to, because a lot of what governments feel is they need capacity building. So one of the key asks when we do this is they say we need training, and we don't want them to be dependent. There are limits to what training can do. Capacity building is much broader than that. So what we've done and what we're starting to really grow into is to work with local universities to develop their postgraduate qualifications in M&E and some of their short courses. We've done it, for example, with the University of Zambia. Now they've got a short course masterclass in impact evaluation, but also people can choose to do a full postgraduate diploma in M&E at the university. And that course is part of the broader diploma as well, because what they said is that they want to be able to do more impact evaluations. So instead of them, and government is their main kind of client and target cohort in that particular program. So instead of them being dependent on clear aid to come in from the outside to do the training, we then said, how do we develop your own capacity internally in country in order to do this? So just to wrap up, there is value in results-based monitoring, results-based management and monitoring and evaluation. But I think the key point is around partnerships and not having this kind of imperialistic, hegemonic, attitude that we will tell you how to do this and what is wrong with your system and, how you need to change it. It actually needs to be coming from the inside and working in partnership with government, because they do see the value of it. Even though, yes, there are challenges around this compliance orientation, when you speak to the governments, they do realize that it's a challenge and they do want to change it. So yeah, let me end there because my time is up, and I'm sure we can talk some more as the Q&A comes up. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Candice. And thanks to the participants who are adding chats and questions. At 10, but I'll just take, kind of 10 minutes to have a conversation, because really that's the exciting part of this. Candice, I really enjoyed, the kind of, let's say the spirit of what you were sharing, to kind of say, we have to start with where we're at, to kind of truthful evaluation of where we're at, and then think about what's possible. And actually, it struck me as you were talking, so much of, it links to Kayla's point, points that Kayla made and points that Rashid made. So much of what we understand as evidence is based on how we've designed our systems. And we've designed our systems to look for faults. And I mean, that's a kind of natural thing around governance. And maybe we can launch straight into the Q&A with this, or the discussion with this question. How do we rewrite the kind of, the bureaucracy is a slow machine. It's also these kinds of systems that are brought in from new public management and from good governance, criteria, all of that. And we have this idea that if we just get the systems right, and if we just comply with the systems, then we'll get governance right. Or in the story that Kayla shared, if we just think through the kinds of reporting that we are looking for, then we may, we may be able to get things right. Or if evidence-based, we'll get things right. This is the kind of these assumptions that we have, and we've built a system, and we've perfected the system. How do we move outside of that?
I mean, I don't want to hog this space, but I think that's the world we live in, right? Or my organization lives in, and we push this agenda quite strongly. But I want to jump onto what Kayla was talking about. There's a lot of fear in the system, and that's what those are kind of the unspoken things, So when we talk to people, it's, you have to, it's the chain of command, it's the command and control. And I think that the parts of the system that need to be fixed, that will be catalytic, are those parts. I really think that the techno fixes are not the solution. We have to have the technological and the technical expertise, and we have to have a bureaucracy that is effective and efficient. Yes, those are needed, but I think the parts that's more difficult are actually, this unspoken things that's happening, the politics and the political administrative interface, the what's happening there in terms of misalignment of priorities within, and political alliances and all those kinds of things. I think to look at it just as being just the technological side of things and the evidence side of things, I think that's a mistake. So, I don't know what, Rashid's worked quite a long time in that space, and maybe he's got something to share as well. But I also liked what Kayla was saying about fear in the system. I think it has a big impact.
Rashid, Kayla, over to you. I mean, this is the side-by-side conversation that we're hoping to have. So, Lerato, we can spotlight everyone, and then we can have this conversation. Rash?
Yeah, okay. I see there are two questions in the Q&A were probably directed towards me, so I need to talk to those. But let me just pick up on I think what Candice was saying, and I think just the whole conversation about M&E systems, as well as what Kayla was saying. I mean, I think that the one thing when I was in Gauteng, even though I was formerly responsible for a time for M&E, we basically supplanted that system with the so-called delivery approach, which we found to be a lot more flexible. You know, I just had to sort of laugh out loud when I heard her say, when I heard Candice talking about technical indicator descriptors, and that's like the kind of thing that the AG like loves to bits, right? And I mean, they'll kill you if you don't, you know, do those things properly. So we kind of put that aside and focused for the last 4 or 5 years now on this sort of alternative approach, which is a lot more flexible. You didn't have all these like multiple rules about how you should run things. You focus very much on achieving delivery, on ensuring responsibility and accountability through this thing called a stock take, which is actually run by the Premier, and we provided the Secretariat support and so on. I mean, in fact, that's a subject for and for I think all the panelists. I think we should have a seminar about this, because I think we can really unpack a lot of those issues. But I have a lot more to say about that, but I'm just sort of mindful of time. So if I can just jump to the Q&A. So the first question, I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but it says, I would be curious on how government is understanding and actually using the kind of intelligence GCRO is producing to improve on governance and administration. Any specific examples? Well, the answer is that there isn't an instrumental relationship between result and like immediate action. It doesn't work like that. The real world doesn't work like that. In my view, there's a process of learning and diffusion that happens over time, which says, okay, I mean, these are some of the insights that are coming through. I'll give you one example that I know. I mean, Kevin, probably in your time or maybe even before then, at the GCRO, but the whole issue around psychosocial things came up, which is in very sharp relief. I didn't put up any of those slides, but for government to realize that this is actually a problem, not like, okay, I mean, water is a problem. I mean, everyone knows water, electricity, those are problems that we knew about from the year dot. Okay, but the fact that government needed a much more sort of decisive intervention in that area of work, which would cover the health department, the social development department, municipalities, and so on. We still haven't gotten it right, but the sense that we need to deal with that issue is there. And of course, the other things that happened, like Life Esidimeni, unfortunately happened, which showed up that this is a very sort of important sort of area. So that's what I'm saying. There's that kind of process of learning and so on. There are instrumental issues which I'm not going to go into, but and some are very obvious, like the fact that we need to do something about unemployment is a no-brainer, right? So it just reinforces the point. But the new insights, there's a process by which it comes to the fore. Often it's put in as a formal policy, but whether that policy is implemented is another story. You see what I'm saying? So it's not. So it's a very and that brings us to our current conversation about how do you make sure that you take sort of like progressive policies and make sure that they're actually implemented. I can go on, but let me just go to the other question. I don't want to hog all the time.
So Rash, okay. let me broaden out this question for all of you. Okay. I think the second question, it was directed at Rashid around the objectivity of the survey, and whether, the question is how do you avoid being dismissed as either being co-opted or compromised, or as just critique, as you were saying. So I want to broaden it out to put it to Kayla and Candice and Rashid to say, this idea of co-production or even partnership around existing projects that Kayla was talking about. When the state does come in to support, or when the state is involved in co-producing a solution, or in the survey, which is an artifact of this relationship, how do communities or regular people or civil society or users of this feel about it, and how does the project, this kind of collaborative project, avoid being dismissed as, this is just government again, we don't trust government, or we don't trust these results. It's just another ploy of government to politic, all of those tropes in society. How is the survey affected by co-production and this kind of collaboration?
You want me to go?
Yeah, sure. And then we can open it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, it is one of those things that is a difficult sort of road to go on. But let me just say that let me recall something. I mean, a good couple of years ago, there was somebody from a very well-known but unnamed NGO who was speaking about water issues. And this is, I think, just when I was still at the city of Joburg, actually. And this person was extremely critical. And I said, and she didn't know who I was. I was in the audience at this thing. And I said, well, I mean, is anything that government says, do you believe it? And she says a flat no. Okay. So after that, as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to listen to that person, being a public official, because the perspective is that everything you guys do is actually a sellout to neoliberal capitalism, imperialism, okay? The kind of thing, so that's not helpful, frankly. And I'm happy to challenge anybody about that. If that's your starting point, then forget about it. I mean, I like, Candice's approach where you say, okay, I mean, some of these things come from the new public management, but we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And how do we straddle that kind of line? So I think for me, that is the issue. There has to be a mutual kind of understanding, respect, and so on, and say, okay, we are both going to, we will take the critical perspective, we will believe the results of the survey, and so on. So you have to build that kind of relationship. And the relationship, I mean, the reason, and I know I'm running out of time, but let me just say, the fact of the matter is that this potentially tensionful relationship between the universities, believe in academic sort of freedom, etc., and government on the other hand, is a recipe for disaster. But it's worked in the case of the GCRO. I mean, nobody on any side of this partnership will say, let's close this damn thing down because it's too problematic. Not at all. I think because there is a sense that it's constructive, we're learning from each other, and so on. So I think for me that is the starting point. I can say more about it, but let me hear what my co-panelists have to say.
Candice, Kayla?
I can come in here. Yeah, it's a nice question, and I want to link it to some other concepts that have been spoken about and what Rihanna is putting in the chat as well. And I think it comes down to breaking down these binaries between government on the one hand and communities on the other, and understanding that that's a false binary, and also the stereotypes that come with it. So not all government officials are lazy and corrupt and uncreative, and not all communities are demanding and uncompromising. And it's about connecting as humans. And if we're talking about co-production, we're talking about partnering, it's about creating human relationships. And to do that, we need to connect authentically. We can't connect within our labels of either government official or community activist. We need to be seeing each other as one-on-one and identifying the opportunities and synergies that exist. And that concept, I think, is linked to what Rashid has been talking about, the psychosocial and the well-being. And it's the well-being of practitioners and it's the well-being of communities that we need to be talking about. So, for example, how do we have an authentic conversation when we are still traumatized? We are still not dealing with the wounds of the past. So when you go into a community as a government official, how do you navigate that, understanding that those wounds have not yet been dealt with, and those communities have been completely neglected? So when we're talking about the psychosocial, and I think this is what that MBDA work does so well, it's understanding that it's also your own institution that needs healing. So it's your own municipality, it's your own development agency that is deeply traumatized as well. And to start there and to start having those authentic conversations with your colleagues, with your CEO, with your leaders, and take it from there. So that's my understanding of co-production and partnership and how to do it more innovatively and authentically.
Thanks, Kayla.
Maybe just to wrap up, like I'm sure we're hurting towards kind of closing. And I agree 100% with what both Rashid and Kayla said. And in addition to that, I think the state needs to show itself to be trustworthy. So there is a need for bureaucratic coherence. There is a need for efficiency. So those elements where it's meant to deliver basic services and it's meant to, to do the basics, the fundamentals, it needs to get those right. Those are the kind of things that communities look to see, is my water being delivered, do I have electricity, refuse removal, all of the stuff in the quality of life survey. The state needs to get those fundamentals in order, because I think that communities are actually quite, Kayla, as you're saying, quite receptive and quite open. They want to see this change happening as well. And the moment you get to the microcosm of these projects, that's where you see that, people can work together and want to work together. So yes, to the trust deficit, and I think there's a report of the DPME came out with recently around this trust deficit. Part of it is relational, of course, and getting over the trauma, but part of it also is the responsibility of the state to become a lot more efficient, a lot more coherent around the work that it needs to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Candice. And Kayla, I'm happy that you brought in some of the questions that were on the chat and in the Q&A. It struck me that there's some kind of emergent values that we were talking about. In Rashid's presentation, we talked about the kinds of ways that the state engages with this data, often negative, with a sense of maturity and often humility. Kayla talked about this understanding of kind of mutual well-being and demonstrating a vulnerability of the state also to say, we fail at this, but we're getting better. And then Candice talked about this value of being trustworthy, to do the job that you were meant to do and demonstrate that you're doing that really well. And so I think, those things are happening. Sometimes we don't see it well enough. And maybe a 30-second close out from each of you for our public servants who are joining us today and will watch this later, for our students of governance, and for those who will follow the work of the GCRO, CLEAR, South African Cities Network. Just pop into our frame of reference right now. Some of the things that we need to start thinking about for the rest of this day, during this creative bureaucracy festival, things that we can start dwelling on and allow to nurture. Rash?
Well, I'm not on mute. Okay, no, I think that it's been a very sort of useful conversation for me. Some of these things are not only work that I'm doing now in the GCRO, but work that I've been involved in the past in Gauteng, in the city of Joburg. And I think that I'd really like, in fact, I would say, Caryn, if you can facilitate a longer conversation around some of these things, it would be really useful. I mean, I think finding that sort of, let's use the expression that was used about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I think is very important. And let us find that particular place. And I think all the panelists agree that we need to find that particular space to see how we can actually advance performance in government, and ultimately for the benefit of communities at large. Thank you. Thanks,
Rash. Kayla?
Thanks so much. I agree. I think a longer conversation would be fantastic. And there's so many different aspects to this conversation that we're having. And I really like the different views that have been brought in today. And I agree. I mean, I think the architecture is necessary. Of course, the bureaucracy is there to stay. And no, we're definitely not denying that. But we have a problem when that bureaucracy is working against the good work that is happening and working against the innovation. And where practitioners need to navigate that bureaucracy in order to get something done. It should be there to enable good practice, to enable innovation. So I think it's that shift that we all agree in and that we're all talking about.
Thank you so much. Candice?
Yeah, if I could give kind of like a headline parting shot, it would be that as a public official, for those of you who are public officials as participants, to open up your spaces for non-state actors to come into that space and to help think through some of the solutions together. I think some of these spaces are very closed and they don't necessarily need to be closed. I see some of the changes happening in, for example, the DPME in South Africa, where they've included non-state actors into the evaluation technical working group, which I think is a brilliant idea, because that doesn't necessarily happen in all spaces. And in that way, we can start to bring some of the solutions and the ideas that we have, and like you said, co-produce some of these with government. So open up the spaces a bit more, allow for the trust to build from the side of the bureaucracy as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Candice. And thanks to yourself, Candice, to Kayla, to Rashid for your time. As a shout out for this afternoon session that's happening at 2, picking up almost on this conversation about these productive potential relationships between the state and community, and thinking about what's possible to allow civil society into these spaces, as Candice was saying, into these kind of governance spaces, and to think through a kind of collaborative way of doing governance. We're going to be talking to the director of the Kathrada Foundation at 2 o'clock to talk about some of these convivial relationships between civil society and the state. And we know that for the most part, it's kind of adversarial, right? But, and that has a place and it's necessary. But to what extent can we build on this, not just in the academic space, academics as civil society, but civil society proper? And so join us again at 2 o'clock as we engage with a member of a prominent civil society organization. And these conversations, I think, have pointed to the fact of having a broader conversation, and we'll definitely follow through with that about, within the architecture that we have, how do we think differently, and how do we think beyond bureaucracy? We need it. It's part of what we do. And so that's the information about the afternoon session coming up on the screen right now. Thank you so much to Lorato, who's been working behind the scenes getting this program sorted out at the Wits School of Governance. Please do check out the websites of the South African Cities Network. Sitopoli, as Hanna spoke to in the Q&A, the virtual festival of the South African Cities Network, Fear and Power, the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, CLEAR, which is the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results in Anglophone Africa. I read your slides really well, Candice, and the Gauteng City Region Observatory. With that, please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers. Thank you for an engaging session. We love just having a chat. Wish it could happen over coffee and or at a dinner table, but very soon after COVID. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. God bless. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Great conversation. Take care, guys. Bye.